Welcome. My name is Stewart Donaldson, and I'm a distinguished university professor and president of the Claremont Flourishing Center at Claremont Graduate University in the Claremont Colleges in Claremont, California. It's my great pleasure to introduce our new global webinar series, which is a collaboration between the Claremont Flourishing Center and the Rickey Foundation for Happiness. We are living in very challenging times. Most, I think, would agree. But this is set up for us, somewhat surprisingly, a very important time for us to discuss this topic of human flourishing and what we can do to flourish in the situations and environments we now find ourselves in. This year, Claremont Graduate University is celebrating its 100th birthday, what we call 100 years of impact in graduate education. Our focus for these first 100 years is graduate-only education, largely master's and Ph.D. programs, but focused in new and innovative areas that would lead our graduates to become global leaders in these fields. And this year, one of our own, Professor Michelle McQuaid, has moved into the president position at CGU and has been, at least from my perspective, applying a lot of the concepts that we've been teaching around leadership, positive psychology, and helping people in general reach their potential and have a very positive effect on others. And so Dr. Bly, now President Bly, has focused on some really important areas. And one is going to be a theme that runs throughout our first global webinar. And that is the theme of developing healthy, positive partnerships. And the reason there is now a flourishing center and that we're doing this webinar and many other things we're going to be talking about is due to great collaborations with our new and sort of longer term partners. The first partner that I want to briefly introduce, and you'll get to hear more from her a little bit later, is Dr. Michelle McQuaid. And Dr. McQuaid is based in Melbourne, Australia, and runs a very productive practice in human flourishing and well-being, focused in workplaces, educational institutions, and various kinds of community settings. She is an award-winning researcher, LinkedIn's top voice for mental health, an honorary fellow at Melbourne's University Centre for Wellbeing Science. She did her Master's of Applied Positive Psychology with Martin Seligman at Penn and did her PhD with David Cooperrider one of the founders or the founder of Appreciative Inquiry. So she has a very impressive combination of educational experiences and backgrounds. She translates cutting-edge research into practical strategies that help care for well-being in workplaces, schools, and communities. With 9 best-selling books and over 250 podcast interviews with leading researchers, her work regularly appears in Psychology Today, Forbes, and media outlets around the world. Drawing from her personal experience and scientific expertise, she creates playful, practical approaches to help people thrive, even during the most challenging of times. So I'm really thrilled you're going to get to meet her today and hear about her latest research on what she calls her heart framework for dealing with rapid cycles of change that many of us are now facing. But let me now move to our partner for the Claremont Flourishing Center, and many new activities we're developing, and that is the Recce Foundation for Happiness. This year, in June, we launched the Claremont Flourishing Center in a clear and focused collaboration with the Recce Foundation, with a focus on getting a lot of the empirical research that we've done here in Claremont and that's been done on happiness and well-being more generally out into the public domain, into organizations, into leadership trainings, into communities, focusing the science of happiness and human flourishing all across the lifespan. And so our partnership now is about really sharing this science, beyond the journal articles and the, graduate classrooms. We have, I think, a really interesting piece on the Recce Foundation for Happiness website that looks at how we want to train the next generation to not only do the science and understand the science, but to communicate it simply. And we've been now collaborating on faculty trainings around the world to help people better communicate what we now know about the science of happiness and human flourishing. How this came about in the long range is we were very fortunate when the founder of one of the co-founders of Positive Psychology came to work with us here at Claremont, and we were able to 20 years ago develop the first Ph.D. in research focus programs in positive psychology. And so all of the partnerships we've developed in that space over the years, have really helped us, become number one in our field in terms of training the next generation of scholars and researchers that can now hopefully translate that to make a large impact on people's lives, help other people flourish. So Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, was our just key founding leader of our work here at Claremont, as well as co-founder of the field of positive psychology. Another big co-founder that helped us develop all of our evaluation programs, which are essentially focused on the same topic of how do we design programs and interventions using evaluation to have the biggest effect on people's health and well-being and human flourishing. And so Michael Scriven, one of the co-founders of the field of evaluation, spent a couple of decades with us developing our evaluation programs and center and so forth. But before him, and what I think really got us focused on developing new fields here at Claremont, was my former professor. Someone had a big impact on my early career, was the father of modern management, Peter Drucker. And Peter, has developed that field, at least from my lens, around the concepts we're talking about. Effective leadership, strengths. He was really focused on, not spending most of our time on limitations and weaknesses, but leading through strengths. And of course, the connection to measuring results and, really, caring about reliable and valid measurement, was why we, one of the reasons we focused on evaluation and applied research. So as the Recce Foundation has become just a huge partner for us in our 100th year, we have been having all of these activities celebrating our 100th birthday. And on Saturday night, our colleague and president hosted a large dinner under the stars in the middle of the Claremont colleges and talked about our next 100 years, the future of graduate education and training global leaders. And within that, we here at the Claremont Flourishing Center and the Recce Foundation are really central to that vision. AI and how do we use AI for human flourishing was talked about, and just training the next generation of leaders that can have this kind of impact on the world. Well, in that spirit, she announced and it was, no one expected it. It was a secret announcement. Our latest partner. And our latest partner is Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation. And in a video you can see on the Claremont website, Bill Gates honors Claremont as being a leader in this graduate education space, focused on all the issues we're going to be talking about today, and has made a very nice contribution to CGU and our mission moving forward. So I want to start the content of our first webinar here today in our global series with another founding partnership. This is what some know as the famous fish picture, but this is Martin Seligman on the left and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi on the right, who developed a partnership to develop a new field back in 1998-2000 era that they called positive psychology. And this was the first major publication laying out the foundation for much of the work we're doing today. Martin Seligman gave the 1998 presidential address, and the issue is Special Issue on Happiness, Excellence, and Optimal Human Functioning. By 2006, we were able to recruit Mihaly. It was so lined up with our vision here at Claremont. And he became a member of our faculty after he retired from the University of Chicago, brought one of his top students with him, who's now a key professor in our positive psychology programs, Gene Nakamura. And in 2006, in Gallup, in Washington, D.C., the three of us, in front of hundreds of people working in this area, just before, at the very beginning of positive psychology, we announced that Claremont was going to offer the first Ph.D. and research MA programs in the science of positive psychology. Since then, we've built a very robust faculty and trained hundreds now of students in science of happiness, human flourishing, and positive psychology. When we map that out, we're just amazed at the work they're doing in various countries and various industries. It's just become a huge success for Claremont Graduate University. As I said, the mission for that effort has been training researchers, and scientists first, but then helping them figure out, how to have a productive career applying, the science of positive psychology in their interest areas. Our new collaboration this year is more focused on giving this 25 years of empirical research in positive psychology now away to the world, to policymakers, to program developers, to leaders, to organizations, to educational institutions. And the program that we delivered this summer in collaboration with the Recchi Foundation, it was called the Science of Happiness certificate course. And you can see here our faculty and alums were taking areas that the science is well developed in and teaching them to faculty and graduate students and some practitioners all around the world, but mostly in Southeast Asia, ways to take the science and integrate it into their teaching. And so many people are now teaching positive psychology courses in universities and out in other settings. And so this was sort of our train the trainer model idea. And, at a time that wasn't perfect here in Claremont, we, 10 at night was sort of the end of it. But we brought together over 100 current and future teachers of the science of happiness and human flourishing and had great discussions, this all leading to a certificate. The next project we're currently working on is, as you look at the field now, Claremont does have the doctorate, and Penn and many other places now have the MAP applied master's program. One thing to move the field forward is a postdoctoral fellowship program. So try to take, the best doctoral graduates, PhDs, and teach them about the latest on the science of happiness and human flourishing, so they can go out and teach others how to flourish and teach others how to teach others how to flourish based on the science of happiness and human flourishing. If you want information on that, we will be accepting applications shortly. Please reach out to the Claremont Flourishing Center, our Director of Operations, Tatiana Shiminka. So another, turn that, we've made at Claremont is we're really driven to write and do a lot of research and peer review publications. Many of us working in this area, are recognized experts in advancing the science in this way. But when Mahali passed during the pandemic, my a former student that worked with Mahali and I worked with, were really, affected by that. And we tried to figure out how, we could give something to Mahali or do something, memorable as we were, suffering his loss. And we came up with this idea of taking, teaching people, non-scientific audience, trying to, stretch ourselves and be able to write something that was more accessible, teach them both about, how he started positive psychology and his insights and his writings, but also about flow, his main, contribution, and how it's relevant for all of us, 20 years after he wrote it in this very complex and rapidly, changing world. So this book came out this year, and right away, publisher in China, City is their name, asked us if they could translate it into China, as they see this as a positive psych and flow as a very, popular and important topic in China. And so this is the book in the center that I can't read to you, can't read to myself, but looks really impressive. And my Chinese colleagues say it's pretty much exactly the same as what we wrote in English. And we're also going to have a Japanese version. And just this week, it's now our second book, and it's in our Positive Psychology and Wellbeing series, is a practical book meant to be accessible to a broad range of people, called PERMA+4, Building Blocks for Human Flourishing. And within this, you learn about the research behind each building block, and then we give you specific tools and techniques that you can use to take care of your building blocks and to try to live a life of high PERMA+4. To explain it and then get you to interact with a poll, the field of positive psychology now has quite a range of validated measures that get at, well-being, life satisfaction, and human flourishing. And a lot of these measures that we've developed are highly correlated. We have long batteries. I mean, there's some differences, but pretty much we feel like not just surveys, but using experience sampling methods and other techniques, we've really learned how to measure, well-being and flourishing reliably and in a valid way. Cantrell's ladder is a measure that was developed just with 2 items so that we could measure people across the world every year. You've heard of the happiness study. And this measure, again, is 2 items, and the rubric it uses shows a top area where people are thriving and flourishing, a mid area where people are struggling, and then a bottom area where people are suffering. And if you go to this website, they've got years of data up, and you can see how different parts of the world fare on this measure, how countries have changed over time. And it's a really fascinating, accessible, analyses on how people are doing across the world. Within that, billions of people happen to be struggling or suffering. And that's, a lot of what we care about is how do we move them up this ladder. so to speak. So in our lab, where we do a lot of empirical research, a big question has been, what predicts this? What predicts, people who are flourishing? And again, my definition, which is slightly different than some of the other leaders in this field, is I see flourishing as defined as growing. That's the way I want to define it, and doing well in most aspects of your life. Some of the other popular definitions have less focus on growing, and a lot of them I see say all aspects of your life. I think that's too high of a bar personally, but that's the working definition around what I'm talking about. So what are the predictors of this? That's the big question. If people vary on this throughout the world, and a lot of them are really struggling and suffering, what predicts that? And study after study that we've conducted shows that PERMA+4 is the strongest predictor that we have found for understanding, who's living, the good life and experiencing more human flourishing than most. Another partnership we've had for the empirical research we've done, and we're really ramping up now, is Connected EC, which is a company focused on applying PERMA+4 vitality and these other concepts in the C-suites of corporations, mostly across the US. They offer coaching, all based on this research, and they support our Love Lab here at Claremont, where we're doing a lot of this research, and we're doing some really interesting new research that you'll hear about from Michelle today. But in each study, we validated our measures of PERMA+4. We've got a short scale. We have developed a systems perspective where we can measure it at multiple levels of analysis. We've completed a longitudinal study, which we were really impressed by, that shows your PERMA+4 right now, when we assess it, is very predictive of your future in terms of functioning and performance. We found it predicts in the workplace how well people are functioning and performing 15 months after we assess it. And finally, one of the things we've added to this whole area of PERMA is economic security. And we've spent a lot of time now validating a way to measure that, because we think it's so important to take into account where people are in terms of their economic security. And as you know, that's like the #1 issue politically is, standard of living. We hear things like 60 to 70% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. So we're hoping to really get a better understanding of how to, one, understand economic security and how it interacts with flourishing and well-being, but also how to develop that building block better. So here's the PERMA+4 model, and why statistically we believe this has been so powerful in predicting how people's well-being is and how well they function, is because each building block itself has a stream of empirical research, testing the key theories, many of them right in positive psychology. So the PERMA framework, the first 5, was originally proposed by Martin Seligman, one of the founders of the field. And he had looked at, the empirical research that had developed over the first decade of positive psychology. and saw 5 things that were all things we could develop. They weren't fixed. One of the most famous measures that psychologists have developed is IQ. And IQ, of course, there's a lot of controversy around how you use that measure and so forth, but even though it's a good, strong predictor and measure, it's fixed. It's really tough to move that. Whereas PERMA+4, which outperforms IQ when we're looking at human flourishing, well-being, how we work in teams, and how we contribute to organizations, it accounts for much more variance, is something now that people can manage, improve, develop. So that's what makes it especially powerful from a scientific standpoint. So positive emotions. This is largely based on the early work of Barbara Fredrickson and Broaden and Build, and how important positive emotions are in our life. Engagement and flow, of course, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's work with Gene Nakamura, all the engagement workers that study this in workplaces, being engaged in life, where you put your attention, turns out to be a really important building block. Our relationships. Chris Peterson, one of our founders, before every lecture on positive psychology, would say, I can summarize this field in one sentence: other people matter. And the research we've now done over the last 25 years show that this is clearly one of the strongest building blocks that we see in the scientific research. Meaning and purpose. Viktor Frankl doing the early powerful work on this topic. Here at Claremont, we have Kendall Cotton Bronk, who has a Claremont purpose scale. And this also is a very powerful building block. Accomplishment. For example, Drucker's work on the effective executive and how to, manage your life so you accomplish a lot, we find in the studies is very important to our flourishing. Our physical health, and we have a School of Community and Global Health here, and a lot of research looking at vitality by Dr. Jamie Shapiro of our Love Lab, but we added that beyond the first 5 because all of the feedback and data we were getting is that was another strong factor to have in the model. Mindset, both Carol Dweck's growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, and Fred Luthan's psychological capital, where we have hope and efficacy, resilience, and optimism. Our mindset is another really important predictor of human and flourishing. The environments we live in, work environments, broader environments, and how to manage those is another key building block. And finally, as I said earlier, the economic security, and people, that are, let's just say, living at the edge of poverty or in poverty, seem to have to, focus much more on fixing this topic than being able to manage all 9 of the building blocks of human flourishing. So again, statistically, scientifically, we put all these together in a 29-item index. We've got short scales of these, but as we measure across population after population, this is turning out to be a very reliable and valid way to help people understand their level of human flourishing and to help people improve their level of human flourishing and well-being and happiness. So with that, we are going to take a poll. So what I'd like you to think about is what are the 3 most important building blocks. And you can think about this in your context, either yourself, people you know, the kind of work you do. But as you look at the 9, which ones do you think are the top 3, the ones that have the strongest prediction, let's say, on human flourishing? And we are putting the link to do this in the chat. And let's see. Team, can you put that in the chat? This is the poll link. Okay. And so if you could now select what you think are the top 3 building blocks. Yeah, I'll give you just another 30 seconds here. Okay, let's take a look at the results. You can see that 81% of you have relationships as the top building block, and it looks like it's followed by meaning and purpose, and then mindset. But you should be able to see here how these came out and were distributed. So what we're doing at Claremont in our research now is helping people assess their building blocks, but then through a lot of what we call positive psychology activities and interventions, giving them tools to improve these foundational elements to help people flourish in their lives. To give you a workbook that we put together to help you develop your building blocks, please use this link here or the code that's given on the screen. We also have this on the Claremont Flourishing website. But one of the things I think is so true that Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi gave us, one of his key quotes, is that a joyful life is an individual creation that cannot be copied from a recipe. And so when you look at our workbook, when you look at our PERMA+4 book, we're giving you all these things that we've now studied in positive psych that might increase your gratitude, help you look for strengths instead of focus on weaknesses, think about growth versus fixed mindsets. Not all of these work the same way for everybody. And I know from my own journey, some of these work really well, and I'm able to incorporate them into my daily life. And others, maybe I use occasionally, or use in a meeting, and so forth. So the journey is trying to find which of these really work well for you. As I mentioned earlier, our book is now out, but we also have a way for you to assess your PERMA+4, and that is a free assessment. And if you look in the chat, you will see the survey tool, and you can, copy that and use that, get a free report of your PERMA+4, and hopefully you'll find that useful. Now, what I've summarized for you is what Michelle and I are, now thinking of as, these foundational skills and things we can, develop. But as you all know, we now finding ourselves in different parts of the world in unusually challenging times. And so I get a lot of questions, about how can we deal with, these very, for some people, disturbing changes. And what I've been talking about mainly are in these first inner circles of things we can control and things we can try to influence in our life. But there are many other things that we can't control, directly, but we can learn how to deal and adapt to. And, one way we think of this is, what are your controllables? And Dr. Michelle McQuaid has now developed what she's thinking of as contextual skills. And so Dr. McQuaid has a real, thriving practice called the McQuaid group. And she is someone that has, published some amazing studies on this, and is currently engaged in validating and doing research on this new heart framework that is really complementary to our PERMA+4 framework. She did her master's degree at Penn in our Master of Applied Positive Psychology program. She did her doctoral work with David Cooperrider of Appreciative Inquiry fame, which, what a wonderful combination of programs. And she has been really active in podcasts, in the popular literature. And as I said earlier, has an unusually, I think, deep understanding of how to apply positive psych and these techniques out in workplaces and communities and these other kinds, educational institutes and institutions of real world settings. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Michelle McQuaid.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Oh, I've got the croaks. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world joining us. It's such a privilege and a pleasure to have you with us. And thank you to Stuart and the amazing team at Claremont and the Recce Centre for creating opportunities for us all to come together and learn and build common language and evidence-based tools that we can share out into the world. Like Claremont, my mission is to try to give away as much of this as we can. And so I want to start to connect some of those beautiful foundations that Stuart has been talking us through around PERMA+4 and how do we flourish to this challenge of the context that we all find ourselves in wherever we are in the world. I'm in Melbourne, Australia today, but every part of the world, I think certainly throughout 2025, we have been feeling that there is a lot more outside of our control, perhaps than we've encountered at any other time in our life, even during the global pandemic. And I think what was interesting is The global pandemic was a very clear thing outside our control, kind of understand the shape of it. Whereas I think 2026 has really had us feeling there are suddenly many more things that are hard to put our finger on, are hard to talk about sometimes with each other, and exactly how do we flourish during these challenging times. So let me try to share some slides on screen with you. Maybe Stuart, just give me a thumbs so I know that those are up. Yay! Let me know if people can't see them at all. And happy to make slides available. If you want them afterwards, you can just reach out. I think it's helpful even just to start with, what do we mean by change? It's amazing when you go scour the academic literature, there's not really a clear definition on what any of us mean by change. Peter Senge is one of my inspirations in this space of systems change, also hugely influenced by Peter Drucker's work as well. But I like this kind of summary from Peter. It's not a direct quote, it is a summary of his ideas that change is this process by which something becomes different. And of course, as we all know, change is happening all the time, every day, and it has always been the way. But a lot of the time, the things that are becoming different for many of us have not been quite so obvious, so visible, and not so challenging for us, not so complex, often far more simple changes that we've navigated in life so far. What has shifted in these last few years, and the World Economic Forum and others doing really important research on this, is what I like to think of as a super cycle of change that we now find ourselves in. The academic definition for this is a polycrisis. I find that something I need to lie down after I think about for too long. A super cycle of change feels like, okay, there's something happening here, I can figure my way through. But whatever words or language works for you and the people that you are helping. The map that you can see on your screen comes from the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Survey from 2022 to 2023. And at that time, they were already starting to identify a number of economic, social, political, technological, and environmental changes that were happening simultaneously, but at a scale and kind of strengthening and reverberating off each other in ways that we had not encountered previously in our lives. And I think the hard thing as you dig into this data is to understand that really we are just at the start of this super cycle of change. And wherever you are in the world, whether you believe in climate change or not, the reality is when we look at the data, the next 10 to 15 years for humanity are going to be challenging. And we're already feeling this in our supply chains, in our food cycles. It's why we have cost of living crisis challenges in so many cities all over the world. And of course, our brains really don't like this amount of change. They're not the best fans of change when it's a smaller thing, but a super cycle of change really has many of our brains feeling a little OFUD. Oh, FUD is how Amy Webb describes this, who is a futurist out of New York. The fear, uncertainty, and doubt that so many of us are experiencing. And perhaps like you, at the start of this year, we started to notice in many of our organisations we're working with, and we work in schools and government and not-for-profits and corporates and publicly listed companies of all sizes all over the world. Around the start of this year, I kept saying to our team, it seems like people's nervous systems are fraying. Everybody just seemed a little more fraught, a little more on edge, a little more overwhelmed, a little bit more sensitive, a little bit less patient on things. I think many of us have seen this in social discourse out in the world, but maybe you've been feeling that yourself in your bodies as well. And when we talk to our clients about, does it feel like people's nervous systems are fraying a little bit at the edges? People's heads would start nodding. We're like, okay, what is going on? When we started to share some of this language around this super cycle of change, what was happening, suddenly people were like, yes, it's that. It just feels like change has stepped up to another level. The speed of it, the complexity of it, it feels like there's no breath in between one change before the next thing's coming at me. So how do we flourish? How do we grow and do well in most aspects of our lives during a super cycle of change that, unlike a pandemic where there was kind of a light at the end of the tunnel, right? This was a thing that was happening. We would figure out how to protect ourselves from it, and then it would be done and we could kind of go back to where we were before. That is not the opportunity here in a super cycle of change. This super cycle of change is going to require all of us to find quite different ways of living. So how do we get there? Earlier this year in April, we started to see a term come out of some research in the US. It was actually an organisation had done research on workplace wellbeing, and they had summarised everything they were seeing in workplaces at that time in the US with this term that it looked like people were quietly cracking. And they hadn't actually measured quiet cracking directly. It was a wraparound of all the ways they'd measured workplace well-being. But I picked up this term and I was like, that is what I'm seeing with people's nervous systems fraying. And we started testing it with clients and they had the same reaction I did. Every time I'd say, do you feel like people are quietly cracking? Their heads would start nodding. Maybe your heads are already nodding now. And as a researcher, I was like, okay, what the heck is this thing? How do we define it? How do the people experiencing it really describe what's going on? And how do we test its impact? I was kind of concerned that, are we just talking about burnout by a different name? Does it need a different name? Maybe we've all got enough of this already. So we went and we measured with more than 1,000 Australian workers in July what on earth was going on here. And we asked them, do you feel like you're quietly cracking? And for people that scored 4 and above on a 10-point scale, we were like, something's going on there. And so for those people, we said, can you tell us in your own words, what does quiet cracking feel like and how's it impacting you? And when we gathered together all of those data points and analysed them, there was a very consistent theme. It had 3 factors to it. It said that they were trying so hard on the outside to keep it all together. They were trying to maintain their expected work performance. That was the first factor. But the second factor was that they were hiding on the inside that they were falling apart, which was the third factor. So trying to keep it all together on the outside, hiding, masking, the second factor, that on the inside, they're falling apart. And so we were curious about this. We're like, okay, is there anything that we gathered in the data of this population that we could test that against? And we had measured how was performance looking for people. So when we intersected kind of a low, medium and high across that 10-point scale for whether you were cracking or not, and how you were doing on average, what was the mean score for performance, we saw this really interesting U shape you can see on the screen. So people who were rarely cracking were saying, look, I'm kind of at a 77 for performance right now. As soon as they started sometimes cracking, you can see it dips down to 66 there, which is a significant drop statistically. But then when they're often cracking, they U-shape, they kind of rally and they don't get back to where they started. But you can see them trying to hold it all together on the outside a little in this self-report data. The other item we had measured was thriving. We'd asked them, are you thriving? And what we could see there was the falling apart on the inside. So people rarely cracking, sitting at 67 on average. People sometimes cracking and often cracking though, coming straight down, and they're staying down. And so we've put together at the moment this working definition that quiet cracking is this trying to maintain expected performance while masking internal struggles. And we're actually going to go test this further. We've developed a little scale to try to measure these 3 factors with the Claremont team in the US in early December. So we'll have more to share on this. Watch this space. But I do think it's interesting for us to understand if we are trying to support human flourishing using PERMA+4, positive psychology, other wellbeing research that we've spent these last decades exploring and building, how do we do that in the midst of a super cycle of change where people's brains and nervous systems are experiencing a lot of that FUD and it is causing people to quietly crack? What we found was that 1 in 2 Australian workers were quietly cracking, and this is similar to data we're seeing out of the US and other countries as well, and that it was different from burnout. If you were quietly cracking, you were 6.2 times more likely to end up in burnout. It was like a precursor stage to clinical burnout. So we saw some of the exhaustion, the holding on, but clinical burnout also has exhaustion, cynicism, and that loss of professional efficacy. I feel like what I do, really, it's not going to make any difference. I can't get there. And so this clinical burnout number was lower than the quiet cracking number. So they did seem to be two separate things. And then we were really curious, like, what is causing it? And what we found was that 2/3 of the causes were world related and only 1/3 of the causes were work related. So this is an interesting challenge in a workplace situation. If my people are quietly cracking, they're struggling with performance, they're at risk of burnout, what is mine to intervene on? And so the biggest driver of quiet cracking out in those world factors was cost of living. 41.7% of people said it is cost of living. But the way I think about cost of living as a researcher is cost of living is just the very pointy and personal point at which those economic, technological, political, social, environmental changes are felt by most of us day to day. The second one was job security. So a fear of losing my job, and then we can see the other themes playing out. What's interesting also, I think, is in the work-related factors, the biggest risk for quiet cracking is poor change management in workplaces. So in Australia, we have legislation that says workplaces must measure the social and emotional hazards that are contributing to things like burnout. And so we've gathered this data now. It's been in place for about 2 years. For the last couple of years, we talk with workplaces in Australia all the time measuring this, and we consistently see poor change management, at least in the top 3. But this was the first year in the population study we'd seen it come to number 1. So we've got this super cycle of change, workplaces not really doing well in terms of how they're managing it, this test of quiet cracking that's potentially leading to burnout for them going on, and in the midst of it, how do we help people flourish? It's a lot, right? It is a lot, and we are in territory where we have not been before. We need new language and tools to figure out how we navigate our way through all of this together. The big thing that came out, both from our population studies, but I think we see from data in many other places as well, is that it's how do we get past the hiding and masking so we can talk about these things with each other. Part of it's the language. Part of it is feeling safe enough in our brains and in our nervous systems to actually feel like we can talk about these things with each other and not be judged or shamed or blamed for the fact we're not resilient enough or we're not coping. And then to sit in the messiness and the awkwardness and the discomfort of that as we try to use those PERMA+4 foundational skills and other tools to flourish even in the midst of struggle. But none of us are going to be able to do this alone. Back to your very wise responses in the poll earlier, that it is going to be all about relationships here as we go forward. So this is what we've been seeing, testing. I've spent a lifetime really trying to understand how do you navigate change. I experienced lots of change very early on in my life that I was not happy about, and by the age of about 12 I had decided that was it. There would be no more change. Stuff was going to stay steady and stable. I was going to lock it down. And of course, no sooner do you make a foolish declaration like that than you realize you can't stop change. It's like trying to hold back the tide. And so really I've spent the rest of my life trying to figure out how do you navigate change more successfully. It was a big part of what drove me into the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology at UPenn. And then I was fortunate enough, as Stewart mentioned, to do my PhD looking at systems change with Dr. David Cooper-Ryder. And so then to apply it with hundreds of workplaces and thousands of different people all over the world to go, what works here consistently? And how do I simplify complex system science into something that very busy leaders with too many things on their to-do list already can practically take and use each day without causing an existential crisis for everybody around me. And I'm blessed to work with an amazing team of people, the wonderful Michelle McQuaid, Maureen McKenna, Lewis Oloro, and others who've really been helping test and shape this work. And where we came to was this acronym of HEART. So I'll let you just for yourself, you don't have to share on screen, but just to test for yourself, how are you navigating change right now? It could be in your workplace, could be in your own life. Maybe think about the last 2 weeks if that's relevant for you, but feel free to push it out if you need longer. And we'll use a 10-point scale for this. So never at 0 through to 10 all of the time. And here are the 5 heart factors. And we call them heart because each of the factors starts with one of those letters as you move through. So for honor feelings, have you been expressing your true thoughts and feelings about the changes? 0 through to never, through to 10 all of the time. I know I'm struggling with this when I find myself biting my tongue a lot or getting stuck on the hump of politeness, not wanting to ruffle any feathers. Our second factor is engage purposefully. I engaged in meaningful conversations about the changes happening. 0 for never, through to 10 for all of the time. Are we talking with each other about it? Are we honouring that relationship need that we all have? The third factor is appreciate strengths. I used my strengths to contribute meaningfully towards the changes. This is a big one, right? Think about that state of flow that Mike researched for so much of his life. Reach out. Am I asking for help when I need it around the changes? I think of Dr. Wayne Baker and Adam Grant's research around givers and the need to help, and often that this is the one thing that stands in our way of success, but how much we don't like to bother or burden other people. And then our fifth and final factor is take tiny steps. I took actions that help move the changes forward. I think about Teresa Amabar's wonderful research at Harvard on the progress principle, for example, here, or Dr. BJ Fogg at Stanford on tiny is mighty when it comes to changing our behaviours. Just know wherever you are, that's just where you are right now. Maybe it's working for you and you feel like you are thriving through change and flourishing right now. Maybe it's something showing up there. You're like, yeah, that. Maybe a little more of that is the factor that I need to be prioritizing. Let's explore, 1, does this have any actual impact? And then 2, how does it sit with PERMA+4? So we're not just adding more things unnecessarily, which is the thing that my mind's always worried about for leaders. So does this have any impact? We'll share in the chat, if we can now, team, a little academic study. So if you're, an academic summary. So if you're like, how the heck, Michelle, did you end up with these 5? Where has it come from? Who else's research is it based on? What sits behind each of these factors? That little academic summary that's going into chat gives you all of that. It's actually part of what we've been using at Claremont to get ethics approval for the next wave of studies that we're doing. But again, in the simplest form, if I come more from a systems lens rather than just an individual lens through that sort of workplace application, when we're honouring feelings, we're making space for all the emotions from excitement to fear that people might have about change. And we're learning to regulate how our brains and our nervous systems respond. One of the reasons that poor change management is the biggest risk in workplaces is that we're so busy with our project plans, we don't think about the emotional and social impact that change is having on people. And so if we can't honour the emotions and make it safe enough to talk about them, we don't have the psychological safety we need to understand how change is happening. The E around engaging purposefully is those meaningful conversations that, again, support psychological safety so we can process uncertainty together. So we're not masking and we're not hiding, and we're figuring out what we care enough to own individually and collectively to take change forward. Engaging purposefully is where self-organisation happens, which is actually really how all change happens. It's just often as leaders, we like to delude ourselves that we can control the change and people's behaviours with promises of rewards and threats of punishment. I mean, this lays so much at the heart of all of Peter Drucker's research around how, as leaders, do we support self-organisation. Appreciate the strengths, also, of course, at the heart of Peter's research. How do we build on past successes and create the confidence we need to face whatever comes next? I think about David Cooper-Ryder's suggestion that rather than spending 80% of our time on weaknesses and 20% on strengths, the way our negativity bias leans us, how do we flip that equation and spend 80% of our time on strengths and 20% addressing the weaknesses? And when it comes to both the weaknesses and strengths, how do we reach out for help so that we are not trying to navigate these things alone? But also I think about Wayne Baker's research that says when we reach out for help, the reason that's often the number one thing standing between us and success is we get to access other people's knowledge and resources and ideas. So we immediately expand our capacity the moment we turn to somebody else than what any of us have alone. And then to take the tiny steps. How do we break big changes down into micro moves that can create momentum so that we can sense, learn, and adapt as things keep going? One of the other reasons poor change management is at the top of those risks of quietly cracking internally for people is we spend all this time writing big change project plans that are normally out of date within weeks of being finished because they can't take into account that the world around us and within each of us keeps changing regardless of what is on the plan. And so those plans often really struggle to adapt and to flex and to pivot in real time and to capitalize on the learning that we're getting along the way. And so this is our heart framework. And we did test it in that Australian study to go, do these factors work? Are they a collective? Is one more important than the other? And I want to give you a few early insights of what we had. We are going to test this further in the US research. So at an individual lens, we talk about this as kind of the me level for each person. We found that these heart capabilities were a protective factor against quiet cracking. And while we can see there that honouring feelings and appreciating strengths definitely had a big impact, collectively, when all 5 heart factors were in that higher, more frequently practiced range, the risk of quiet cracking dropped by 17%. So there was a piece here that the whole was stronger than the parts, and that was part of what we were testing. We were also curious around success rates of change. Most of us have seen plenty of data that suggests a lot of change fails. And so we looked at, well, okay, has change been successful in terms of what's been happening in your workplace? And for people who told us change had been either very successful or somewhat successful for them, again, they were much more likely to have these high levels of the heart factors. And here we can see engage purposefully and take tiny steps as the 2 factors that are driving change success in particular. But again, the whole had a bigger impact than any one factor alone did. So there's something here about this multi-dimensional approach to the context that's happening around us. And then the other one that we tested was, what about this poor change management risk? Can we actually lower that risk so that we're managing change more effectively in workplaces? And here we looked at that organisational level. What are we doing across a systems lens at the workplace? And here again, we saw that if we had more frequency of these heart factors, more practice of these capabilities, we were much less likely to be experiencing poor change management when it came to frequency. And in fact, here the number was 24%. So if I had these heart factors present at that higher level, more frequent level, we were 24% less likely to be experiencing poor change management in our workplace. So there's something here. It's early days, right? You guys who are researchers here know this is early days. But there's enough here that tells me, hey, keep researching and figuring out what is going on here and thinking about how does this intersect and what practically can we give people around it. And so that is the path that we're on, both with the Claremont team and with ourselves at the Michelle McQuaid group. The big piece we're trying to help leaders understand is that because we're in this super cycle of change, we need to support the human experience, the emotional and social experience, not just the project plans. And not an either or. You can hang on to your project plan. I'm not going to rip that out of your hands. And I want you to hold it a little more lightly And I want you to think about where is the emotional and social impact on people. Because if people's brains are feeling not safe enough, if their nervous systems are sitting more in their protection circuits, then it's pushing the blood and oxygen out into their arms and their legs and triggering their stress responses more often. And that is a very hard place to navigate change from when you are in the midst of a super cycle for the next decade. Yeah, it's not where we need people to be, and it's why we see this quiet cracking trend. But if I can help you to feel safe enough in your brain so that your nervous system stays in its connection circuits more often and it's pushing the blood and the oxygen up to the front of your head, to the prefrontal cortex where you do all your best work, so that you can be curious and creative and compassionate and connected and confident and courageous and calm and clear. That is where I need you more consistently in a super cycle of change to be. And so that is my job as your leader, as your organization, to be creating that kind of context for you to then be able to flourish in whatever way that looks like for you in. So the last little bit before we take questions I just want to show you is where Stewart and the Claremont team and myself and our team are thinking about where might this intersect exist? Where might the PERMA+4 skills actually help us meet the moment with the Heart of Change framework together? So the way I think about the PERMA+4 skills is that they are foundational skills for flourishing. And as Stewart mentioned, even though they've started through a very individual lens, they absolutely, we've seen, work also at the we, the team and leader level, and the us, the organisational level as well. I was fortunate to be studying with Marty Seligman when he was working on the PERMA framework. It was just before he released his book Flourish. And in class that year, we were debating all of these different elements as to what should or shouldn't be in the PERMA model, amazingly. There was lots of debate about health and many of the other factors of mindset, environment, economic piece that the +4 has been added by Stewart and the Claremont team on. So these are the foundational skills. The challenge is they don't always take into account our context. And that was okay. When our context was reasonably stable and steady, not such an issue. But now that our context is so dynamic and becoming increasingly complex, we need something to sit alongside it. So the way we're thinking about this at the moment is that we need to be able to do this with heart. And that heart, those factors I'm just starting to introduce to you, are the contextual skills for flourishing. And I'll show you in a second what this looks like practically. Again, we look at heart through a systems lens of me, we, and us. And I think about this, about the world within me. PERMA+4 is the world within me. How am I looking after me in order to grow and do well in most aspects of my life? I think about heart more as the world around me. What's happening outside of me in the context, so that when I bring my foundational skills to it, I think about it a bit like being on a wobble board, that the context isn't throwing me off the board, but this combination of both allows me to wobble back and forth and keep kind of finding my core so that I can show up and be the person I want to be each day in this world. So what does it look like practically? I'll just leave you with a couple of examples here. So we think about that heart factor of honouring the feelings, and we look through the me, we and us lens. I'm going to come down to the us lens for this one. And so this is the work of Sigal Bassard and Mandy O'Neill around emotional climate that they have been doing for more than a decade. Sigal has now passed away, but Mandy continuing on this beautiful work. And they look at the emotional climate. How do emotions ripple across a climate in a workplace? And so we're going to go to this second little box down the bottom there around designing emotionally aware communication. So during change, when we ask workplaces, well, what's the thing causing poor change management? The number one thing they'll answer is communication. And when we dig underneath that, it's not really that any of us want more communication, because there's plenty of noise already. It's part of what makes it hard to engage with. But they do want better connection. And better connection comes from having emotionally aware communication, where I'm not just telling you the facts or what's required of you, but I'm thinking about, when I send this communication out, how might you be feeling? Are you feeling safe enough or not safe enough? And if you're not safe enough, what can I put in this communication that might help give you a sense of feeling, I see that, I know this is a lot right now. I'm creating opportunities for you to come and talk with us and engage in it. It's okay if you feel like you're quietly cracking in this moment. I feel that way too sometimes. So, emotionally aware communication here could be a practical application where we take from PERMA things like positive emotion and relationships and meaning, for example, and we fuel it with a way to make all of that okay for the moment and context that we are in. Let me give you one more example and then we'll throw it over to questions. I'm happy to come through more of these if that's one of the questions you've got. So let's come to engage purposefully. Remember, I was talking about this around what do we care enough to own? How do we support self-organization, which scares the bejesus out of most leaders, I've got to say. So how do we give them the confidence to do what is already happening and let go of their delusions of control? So here, for example, at the very top, at the me level, you can see we've got this idea of change crafting. And we took the PERMA work around job crafting from Amy Ranuski and her colleagues. I often teach job crafting as part of engage and flow work when I'm doing PERMA. But here we've applied it to change. How do we think about the why, the what, the how, the who, the when, that we might be able to craft in the change, even if it's not a change that we chose, even if it's not a change we're excited about. But what comes back in my control in this context that might help me use my PERMA+4 flourishing skills to apply it to this context. So Stewart, I'm mindful of time. We could go on and on through here. Why don't we go to questions and I'll have some water as we go.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I know there's a lot more we can talk about. Those of you still with us and have some things on your mind, please use the Q&A box. I'm going to respond to, I've been watching both boxes, the chat and the Q&A, and for everybody that is here, registered for the webinar, we're going to send you all these links. And I know some of you weren't able to get them in the chat, others were. So our team will make sure you get all the materials that you would like.
And Stuart, I might just share out the QR code for the survey. I can see a few people asking for it in the Q&A there for a moment too.
Great. Okay, so we have that up, and please take that and think of it as a self-assessment tool that we hope is useful. Let me just shut my window. My gardener has arrived. Hold on 1 second.
No problems. While you do that, Stuart, I can see a couple of questions there that I might be able to help with.
Yeah, I'm back.
Awesome.
So the first question, I'll just go down the list, is CGU's new postdoc program sounds great. Will it be online or in person? Again, thinking of Bill Gates and the new future of graduate education, we've got the first virtual postdoc program that we've ever launched, but we're going to provide in-person opportunities to get to know people. All of the postdocs won't be at Claremont. We'll have a few, but they'll be distributed through other universities, and our core group is mostly in Asia, Southeast Asia. So we'll be posting our opening up our applications very shortly. So I hope you'll share the news, and we'll develop a whole new cohort of people studying happiness and human flourishing. Thank you, TJ. Nat Lee says, you mentioned growth. Do you consider psychological richness as an indicator or part of growth? Let me just say yes, but let me ask Michelle to give her perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting with Gallup's flourishing scale, you were showing us, Stuart, from the, sort of, thriving to struggle to suffering. And that it's, again, a very vertical scale. A lot of the research that we've done over the last decade with Dr. Peggy Kern at Melbourne Uni, we've actually intersected thriving and struggle more as a 4x4. And I think, again, are we talking about simple flourishing or are we talking about complex flourishing? And what I love about your definition of growing and doing well is that it allows perhaps more of that complex space where there is a psychological richness to it, not just you're high or you're low, which I think is a more simple way of thinking about this.
Great. Some of the others, I know somebody had to go to class, and I'm dropping down to people that are still with us. Maddie Painter asks us, what's a practical first step for me to implement these models in my life tomorrow? Let me give a short answer and then ask you to give a little bit longer answer. Michelle's got practical steps for both PERMA+4 and for the heart components. What we're trying to do with our research is to create these tools that you can try, and also try to create communities where you can try things together. Mahali Csikszentmihalyi and I worked together, for a long time. And one of my insights when I was doing the book was he was just really drawn to sort of flow in its original state, and just an amazing, deep thinker, and learned how to experience that state a lot. I much prefer social flow. I love to flow with others, and so in a lot of the materials that we've developed, we talk about ways to do this with others. So, but get started right away, trying the tools we've been giving you today. Assess how you're doing now, and begin to develop these. Michelle.
Yeah, so the survey tools are a great one that we've been sharing. It'll allow you in about 5 minutes to get your own personal report, and you'll be able to see where am I on the PERMA+4 factors, where am I on the heart factors. It has a few little questions there to help you go, well, what's working well in all of this? Where might I be struggling? What am I learning from what I'm seeing in this data? And what do I want to try next? Exactly to your beautiful question. In terms of some of the things, particularly if you're feeling a little like you're quietly cracking right now, what we've found can help people is, again, just to honor the feeling, right? Some of it's this language. Maybe instead of masking or hiding that today, it's going to have a chat to somebody and go, went to this weird workshop. I realize maybe I'm quietly cracking. How are things feeling for you? So just honoring that feeling, again, the numbers are very consistent around the world right now. If you are feeling like you are quietly cracking, you will not be alone, or perhaps there are people in your life who you can see it's been hard for recently. The engage purposefully, my favorite question is, what do you care enough to own? And so again, in a super cycle of change, there can be so much coming at us, but just what is the next thing you care enough to own, to want to bring your strengths to it? Yeah. Could you turn that to do into a ta-da, as Barb Fredrickson likes to say, by aligning a strength to that challenge that might give you a little more confidence and energy to tackle it? If you're still feeling uncertain, can you reach out for help? Is there one person that you say, hey, I'm really struggling with this. Could you help me? And know that in that moment, I'm an introvert, so reaching out for help for me is like a last resort. But what I love in Wayne's research with this is that it actually doesn't matter whether somebody says yes or no to your request for help. What matters is that you showed that you respect and value that person enough that you were willing to ask and be vulnerable with them. And that will always improve your relationships as long as you've asked respectfully. And then shrink the change down, take a tiny step. Tiny is mighty. Just one small thing forward will help you feel more confident to engage in what's happening.
Great. Here's a little sidebar for Michelle. I think she knows my big attraction to Australia, Melbourne, is I've spent my life with my boys now, who one of them works with us, going around the world surfing. And one of the world champions of surfing has been with us today, Sean Thompson, and is saying excellent presentation to your work. I don't know if you're familiar with Sean, but thank you, Sean. That was great. He runs a lot of excellent, webinars on related positive psych topics. Mel Ganis is someone who is a very well-known researcher that's helped us in our professional association. She says, brilliant, so glad I could listen live. Are there any other related WPP events coming up? We are going to do webinars on a quarterly basis. So our next one will be in the new year, and we'll make sure you get a link. So Hari asks, is there a possibility of leveraging technology to capture some data, neural markers, without relying too much on self-reporting in these surveys? And let me just answer briefly and then turn it to you, Michelle. In the lab that I mentioned, a number of our students are really focused on these other ways to measure. One, which Bill Gates talked about, is artificial intelligence. The AI sometimes shake around in my head. But our director of operations, Tatiana Shimakina, who's a Russian positive psychologist, would like to comment on this question, but I'll let her do that after you say a bit about these other measures.
Look, I think absolutely, and more of that. Then the technology is getting better all the time, both from AI. I'm really interested in the somatic markers, and so different ways that we have to measure stress that are becoming more mobile on people. Again, I think what we often don't understand, particularly when it comes to how we navigate change, is that this is a very biological process that is as old as human beings. And so I think, again, as we're starting to understand how to see those nervous system responses with physical markers, it would be fascinating to me to see different studies showing where are we in those stress responses and what helps us feel safe enough. I keep coming back to these two words, Stuart, because we're finding with leaders, a lot of this is around giving them simple language to understand what's going on for people and then therefore how they need to show up for their people. And so helping leaders understand that the brain's number one job is to keep us alive each day. And in order to do that, it's constantly gauging moment to moment. Am I safe enough or not safe enough? Am I safe enough or not safe enough? And that this then triggers the nervous system into its different circuits and it pushes the blood and oxygen into different places. And that, I think, helps leaders understand why all of this matters and therefore why they need to understand how to support flourishing with their teams and their people. So, but would love to hear more.
Oh, great. Tatiana, do you want to come on camera? There you go.
Yeah, hi. So the question was, how can we leverage technology for not to rely on self-reporting these days? So recently I met an AI specialist who is very much involved in assessing the well-being data at the workplace with PERMA+4, just using the chats between the workers, the employees. And yeah, I think we have a lot in the future, a lot of means to assess the data, to implement the tools into AI, and it will help us.
Okay, excellent.
Interestingly, we did study in that Australian report, and it's there in the chat if people want it, the impact of the use of AI tools on well-being. And it's one of the things we'll test in the US data as well. But we did see while performance also did a similar U shape, although it ended up better if you were often using the tools than but when you started, it does have quite significant unfortunate consequences on civility in workplaces, on our relationships, on well-being, on self-compassion. And so we're really curious to continue to find how, as we use the AI tools more, do we continue to bring PERMA+4 and heart to the people using those tools, so that the ways the use of the tools is impacting our brains and how we're working is not detrimental to the overall outcomes we're all seeking. So I think lots more to learn in this space.
Okay. Well, I have so many great gifts in my life, but one of them is my colleague that I work regularly with, Professor Gloria Gonzalez. And Gloria is really a top level researcher and thinker in occupational health psychology. And she asked us a very good question, and one that I think we get asked a lot in positive psychology. She says, as someone who's mindful about construct proliferation, especially given that we already working to map out the relationships between so many occupational health constructs, I'm curious about your thoughts on something. Could we potentially capture the phenomenon you're describing through existing frameworks? For instance, we think of this as part of burnout, the burnout continuum, or perhaps low engagement as a way to understand these experiences. I'd love to hear your perspective on what unique aspects of quiet cracking captures that these existing constructs might not fully address. And what do you see as the key distinctions that make this a valuable addition to our understanding?
Yeah, and again, I'm always mindful of, do we need another term and another measure and another framework for something, Gloria? So I love that you are asking this, and it's definitely something that's on my mind as well. The reason that I went to measure quiet cracking as well as burnout, which we've been measuring for some time, was because I could see when that term first popped up in the US in April, over the next few months, it started popping up in lots of places in the US. If you go Google quiet cracking, you'll be amazed at how much general news reporting there was that picked up around that phrase. And as I was testing it and I'd see leaders' heads nodding, I was like, okay, there's something in this. And that was why, like you, I was curious, like, is this just burnout by another name? What on earth is going on? We'll go and fish around and see what might be there. And so I was particularly interested to see, okay, yep, it does look like there's overlap, but there is also some difference going on here. So maybe there's something in it. It's early days, right? We've done one study on it, and this term has been around for a little bit. So I think we may eventually absolutely be able to see it as part of the burnout continuum, that this is where early burnout starts and what it looks like. The other piece of it, though, that I'm always interested in is, what is the language that leaders and people and workplaces are using, and that is sticky for them, right? If you think about how change has happened throughout humanity, it has normally been through folklore, through word of mouth, being passed from one person to the other. And folklore relies on visual language that's so sticky for us. We can remember it and we want to tell it to somebody else. The want to tell it to somebody else is the important bit. And so there was something, just because of the stickiness of it, that I was also curious to see, is there a practical benefit as a tool, not just as a measurement, to using this language in workplaces. And definitely what we're finding is, yes, like this month in Australia, our large HR industry body has made this the front cover of their magazine. They released a podcast on it yesterday with our research and clients and things like that. There is something sticky about the folklore change benefit of those two words, quiet cracking, right now, that in and of itself is an intervention, not just a measure. And so that doesn't mean long-term, Gloria, that you're not absolutely right. It probably is, I think, part of the burnout continuum, but maybe it's calling us to look more closely at the early stages of that continuum rather than just at the state of burnout. I do also think that there's a bit of burnout about talking about burnout. In my experience in workplaces right now, it's almost become such a normal state that people are not thinking as carefully about it, or it's gone in the too hard basket for what we do about it. So I look both ways as a researcher and a practitioner to go, what are these things serving me? So I hope that helps. But again, I'm happy to let quiet cracking go if it shows no measurement benefit. My hunch is, and again, I could be wrong, we'll see a bit more in the US data, that perhaps the hiding masking part, that second factor in the middle of the impact on performance and the falling apart, maybe something that's a little different from what we have in current measures. But again, I'm very happy to be proved wrong to that and pointed in the direction of measures I might not have considered.
Hey, well, thank you for that really insightful question, Gloria. Really appreciate it. And what a really thoughtful answer, Michelle. That's great. Not asks us, do you know if there's a connection between quiet cracking and quiet quitting?
So now we didn't ask that specifically. We didn't ask about intention to leave. I suspect there definitely could be, right? If I've quietly cracking, I'm imagining there's kind of this progression going on about I'm starting to quietly crack and then I'm burning out. And then, if I feel like none of that's getting any support, I may start quietly quitting as a coping mechanism. I do think the important difference here is remember that in the quiet cracking, that first factor is they are trying so hard on the outside to keep it all together. Remember that you in performance. Whereas quiet quitting, as I understand it, but happy to be corrected, is a bit more, I'm starting to slow down and not do as much work and kind of get by with the bare minimum or less than. And so my sense is perhaps there's some early difference, but maybe one eventually leads to the other. I could be wrong, pure hypothesis.
Great. Swahari says, thank you, one, and for all the amazing insight into flourishing. Thank you for that comment. And one thing I meant to say earlier is in Melbourne, there's the famous Center for Wellbeing Science at the University of Melbourne. And Michelle's an honorary fellow at that institute. But our last question comes from Renita Rangel, who is a doctoral candidate that visited us from Brazil, where she's doing the PERMA work and positive psych in Brazil. She says, at times, reflecting on economic security can make people feel discouraged and lead to quiet cracking, especially in more vulnerable economic contexts. What protections or conditions would help people feel supported after facing these sensitive reflections?
So, and Stewart, I'll pass this one back to you in a second because you guys have been doing such interesting work around this factor in the PERMA+4. From our end, Renata, again, we think about the hiding. So often when we're feeling economically insecure, we're struggling with cost of living, often feels a sense of shame about why can't I figure this out? Everybody else seems to, be getting on with it. So again, trying to remove that hiding and masking. So the honoring the emotion part, I think is so important to just go, this is hard, it's a lot. Here in Australia, again, the data I saw yesterday was 1 in 2 Australians now are struggling to meet their monthly costs. The unfortunate part of the super cycle we are in is that economic challenge is only going to get greater for all of us. And so we need to be able to find ways to take the shame out of asking for money. perhaps the silver lining in that, another study I recently saw was that when we are economically prosperous, we are much less likely to ask people for help to reach out because we can pay for it, yep, and sort ourselves out. But that actually often leaves us feeling more lonely and disconnected from our communities. And so the other part from honor emotions is the reaching out. I think we have to take the shame out of our willingness to show up and support each other. So for what it's worth, that's what we see on the heart side of things. Stewart, curious from what you're seeing in terms of any interventions or support.
Yeah. So one of the reasons we developed PERMA+4 was we saw a lot of data, and especially qualitative data, suggesting the first 5 worked for people that, let's just say, were pretty well off, but didn't take into account factors that, people that weren't economically secure, wanted to spend time with or thought is important, and so forth. So having economic security is one of our building blocks. As we've tried to study that a bit, we just last week published a study with a new scale, global economic security, to help us go much deeper into how this relates to PERMA+4 and hard and quiet cracking and all these issues. And we're launching a study on it. But my hunch is, it was interesting what you said about the Australian environment. The US environment has really dropped on economic security. Now, at least in the media, between 60 and 70% of people in America live paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
Currently, many of them have even lost those paychecks as our government is shut down. So we're hoping to, and we think this is such an important factor. What are ways you can flourish? When you are limited in your resources, and how do we help people, and sort of in a career and developmental way, make sure that they are economically secure. So a lot of what I hope I can say is to come in our new research, but I would encourage you, those of you that are doing research, to take a look at our scale. It's fairly easy to add to a research study, but I think, just think of it as a moderator. We're going to find some different patterns between people that are economically secure and, of course, well off than those that aren't. So with that, let me thank you all for being part of this first inaugural global webinar. We hope you enjoyed it. We wish we had more time to interact with cameras on, but this format doesn't allow that. And special thanks, of course, to Michelle for all the contributions she's made to the field, and to sharing a lot of her new work now with us. And we hope to have you back and continue our collaboration.
Thank you. And I'll just give a huge shout out to Marty Sucha at The Good Foundry, who's created that tool so quickly. They're the survey tool that you're all enjoying. So much of this we couldn't do without Marty's support. So thanks, Marty.
Okay. Well, thank you, Marty, and thank all of you. And we'll let you know when the next webinar is. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.